Marcus grabbed the biggest melon off the cart, held it up high for everyone to see, and yelled across the yard, "Look what the crazy girl did to her father's land! She threw salt on a farm that was already dying!" The ring of neighbors laughed along, and Grace just stood there, chin up, while old Walter hung his head in shame in the middle of all of them. But to understand how that full-of-himself man ended up with the ground pulled out from under him in the middle of that yard, we need to go back about 6 months, to when old Walter's farm was drowning in debt and nobody would give a dime for that dry piece of land. It was a small farm, at the end of a dirt road, the kind the world forgets. Old Walter had spent his whole life there, working from sunup to sundown, raising his daughter alone after his wife, Ellen, died of a bad illness 3 years before, leaving a hole in him that never once closed back up. And it was Ellen who, before she passed, held Grace's hand at the edge of the bed and asked, in a weak voice, "Don't let your father lose this land, my girl. This land is his whole life." Grace promised, through her tears, with no idea of the size of the promise she'd be carrying for the rest of her days. Back then, Grace had come home from the big city, where she'd studied with a lot of sacrifice in a program to become an agronomist, which is someone who learns the right way to care for the soil and the plants. She came back home the moment she found out her father couldn't handle any of it on his own anymore. What she found squeezed her heart. Old Walter had aged 10 years in 3. His hands shook, his shoulders were always slumped, and his eyes, that used to light up when he talked about the farm, now just stared at the ground. The place was buried in debt, and the bank kept sending letter after letter. And there was one more problem, a problem with a first and last name, Marcus Prine. The richest man in that whole area, owner of the huge farm right next to old Walter's land, a fellow who smiled with his mouth but never with his eyes, and who'd spent years buying up every little patch of small farm that went under. Marcus wanted old Walter's land any way he could get it. He came by almost every week in his big shiny car, and always stopped to sing the same tune. "Walter, you're worn out. This land's finished. Sell it to me and go rest. I pay cash. You walk out of this debt this very day." But the price he offered was pennies, a handout, less than half what the land was worth. Marcus knew the old man was cornered, and men like that can smell other people's desperation from a mile off, the way a buzzard smells food. He was just waiting for old Walter to break for good, so he could take it all for almost nothing. On one of those visits, with Grace nearby, Marcus crossed the line. He looked the young woman up and down, gave a crooked little smile and said, "And this one here, Walter? What did she study in the city for? To come stare at dead land? She should have found herself a rich husband and left the farm to folks who understand it." Grace felt her blood come up, but she swallowed it quiet, because she knew her father couldn't take a fight in the state he was in. But deep down she swore to herself, right then and there, that this man would eat every one of those words. She just didn't know how yet. Her blood boiled, but her head stayed cold. It was that night, unable to sleep, that Grace opened her mother's old notebook again. Ellen, even without any schooling, understood the land like few people did, and she had a habit of writing everything down in a hardcover notebook full of coffee stains and fingerprints of mud. It was the most precious thing she'd left behind. In that notebook, in between garden recipes and notes on the good moon for planting, there was a page Grace had never quite understood as a child. Her mother had written in that crooked handwriting of hers, "The melon that suffers a little thirst and a touch of salt turns sweet as honey. I learned it from my grandfather." Grace read it about 10 times. And then, putting together what her mother had written with everything she'd studied in her program, it clicked. Grace remembered something the professor had taught that almost nobody paid attention to. When a plant goes through a controlled stress, like a little salt in the water the plant gets scared. The professor explained it like this. The plant thinks it's about to die, and in its rush to leave seeds behind for the future, it pushes every bit of sugar it has into the fruit, so the fruit tastes good, and an animal eats it and spreads the seed. Meaning, the right amount of salt, the exact amount, doesn't kill the melon. It makes the melon unbelievably sweeter. Grace spent the whole night bent over the notebook and the numbers, on paper. The amount had to be exact, a precise dose for each row. Too much salt, and she'd truly kill it all, becoming the crazy girl Marcus already said she was. Too little, and it wouldn't do a thing. She was walking a razor's edge, and she knew it. In the morning, with her heart pounding, she took the idea to her father. Walter was sitting on the porch, drinking a bitter coffee, staring at nothing. Grace pulled up a chair, sat down beside him and said softly, "Dad, I know how to save the last melon crop. But you're going to think I've lost my mind." She explained everything. She talked about her mother's notebook, about what she learned in the city, about the secret of the salt that makes the fruit sweet. And when she finished, the old man looked at her with a sadness so deep it hurt. He said, almost without a voice, "My girl, salt kills crops. Everybody's known that since the world began. You want to finish off the little that's left?" Grace held her father's calloused hand and pushed on. "Dad, trust me. Trust Mom, who wrote this with her own hand. We're about to lose it all to Marcus anyway. Just give me this last melon crop to try. If it goes wrong, we lose it the same way. But if it works, Dad, we save the farm." Old Walter sat quiet for a while, looking at his daughter's face, so much like his late wife's. Then he let out a heavy sigh, the kind that carries the whole world, and said, "Do what you want, Grace. I've lost the strength to fight against life. If you believe in it, I'll allow it. I only ask that you don't blame me later." And that's how the madness began, as the folks around there soon started calling it. Grace took the little money she still had put away, went into town and bought bag after bag of coarse salt, the big grain kind. The man at the store even thought it strange and asked, "Making dried meat out of a whole steer, miss?" She just smiled and didn't answer a thing. The day she started spreading the salt across the melon rows, with the exact dose she'd worked out, the first neighbors passing on the road stopped to watch from far off, not understanding a thing. One whispered in the other's ear. The news ran like fire through dry brush. "Walter's daughter is throwing salt on the crop. The girl's gone right off her head." By the end of that afternoon, when Marcus's big car showed up around the bend in the road, there was no more hiding it. He stopped the car, got out slow, looked at the salted rows and started laughing out loud, a laugh that echoed across the whole yard. He clapped his hands mockingly and yelled so Grace would hear him good. Marcus yelled, pointing his finger, "Now I've seen everything in this life. The city doctor came back to salt her own crop. Walter, your daughter isn't crazy, she's just plain stupid. She threw away the little that was left." And he laughed and laughed without stopping, holding his belly while his hired hands laughed along out of fear of the boss. Old Walter, standing on the porch, hung his head and went inside the house, unable to look the neighbor in the eye. That humiliation was the last straw for him. The old man locked himself in his room, and Grace heard, through the door, her father crying softly, the swallowed-down cry of a man who'd already lost even his last bit of hope. That cut her heart clean in two. If that made your blood boil too, watching this rich man laugh at other people's misery, go ahead and drop a like down below, because this story is about to flip completely, and what's coming next, nobody sees coming. The days went by and things only got worse for Grace. A week after the salt, the melon plant started showing signs of suffering. The leaves wilted a bit in the hottest part of the day, drooped down, and to anyone watching from outside, not understanding, it really did look like the whole crop was dying nice and slow, just the way the town had prophesied. The whole town was talking about it. Grace couldn't walk into a store without the whispering starting. The women nudged each other and looked at her out of the corners of their eyes. The children, repeating what they heard at home, even yelled at her in the street, "There goes the crazy salt girl!" And every word like that was a knife, but she walked with her head up, swallowing it all down inside. The worst part was at home. Old Walter barely spoke to her now. Every single day, he went out to the edge of the rows, looked at the drooping leaves on the melon plants, and came back inside without saying a thing, just shaking his head. That silence weighed heavier than any shouting. Grace felt she was losing her own father's trust along with the farm. But Grace wasn't completely alone. There was Miss Cora, an old neighbor past 60, who'd been friends with the late Ellen her whole life. Miss Cora came by almost every day, brought a cake, a coffee, and stood beside the young woman at the edge of the crop, looking at the melon plants right along with her, never mocking a thing. On one of those late afternoons, Miss Cora ran her wrinkled hand over Grace's face and said in a gentle voice, "Child, your mother planted against what folks said too, and she always harvested more than anybody. I saw it. If you learned from her and from the books, you hold on tight. Land doesn't fool the one who cares for it with love. Trust what you know." Those words gave Grace a fresh breath. Every dawn she got up before the sun to tend the rows. She watered the right amount, felt the soil's moisture with her finger, watched each leaf, each flower that opened. She talked to the melon plants softly, the way her mother used to, saying, "Hold on, sweetheart, soon you'll show me what you can do." But Marcus wasn't going to let it slide. He sensed this was the perfect moment to strike. With the crop looking dead and old Walter's spirit down in the dirt, he showed up one morning, all smiles, with a paper in his hand and a fancy pen in his pocket. He'd come set on buying the farm once and for all, for even less than a trifle than before. He knocked on the door, walked in without waiting to be asked, dropped the paper on the kitchen table and said to old Walter, "The game's over, old man. Your daughter killed your crop. You've got nothing. I'm your friend. I'm here to save you. Sign this paper and I clear your debt today. You and the girl walk out with the clothes on your backs, but you walk out free." Old Walter, worn out, defeated, his eyes red from so many sleepless nights, took the pen Marcus was holding out. His hand shook. Marcus leaned over the table with that buzzard smile, pointing his finger at the signature line and saying, "Right here, Walter. Just one little scratch and your suffering's over. Do this for yourself." That's when Grace ran into the kitchen. She'd heard the whole thing from the yard and yelled in a way that froze both men solid. "Stop! Don't sign that paper, Dad!" She came close, pulled the pen out of her father's hand, and faced Marcus head-on, not lowering her eyes for a single second. The silence in the kitchen went heavy as lead. Marcus clenched his teeth and growled at her, "Get out of my way, you fresh little girl. You've done enough damage to this family. Let the men handle this." Grace didn't back up a single step. She said firmly, eye to eye, "The melon harvest is close, Mr. Marcus. It's very close, and you're going to have to wait and eat crow." The man went red with rage, snatched the paper back into his hand, crumpled it up half awkwardly, and spat the words out. "Fine, doctor, fine. I'll wait for your harvest. But when that salted crop gives nothing, and it won't, I'm coming back here, and the price will be half of this handout. I'll take this land for a plate of food, and you'll be begging me." He walked out slamming the door hard, got in the big car and spun his tires down the dirt road, kicking up dust. Inside the kitchen, old Walter looked at his daughter with a mix of fear and one thin thread of hope he didn't even know he still had. He asked, almost whispering, "Grace, my girl, tell me the truth. Is it really going to work?" Grace couldn't lie to her father, but she also couldn't let him fall apart again. She held both his calloused hands, looked deep into the old man's eyes, and said with all the faith in the world, "Dad, I don't know what tomorrow brings, but I know what Mom taught me, and I know what I studied. And the two together can't be wrong. It's close. Hold on with me just a little longer." And the days that followed were the tensest of that family's whole life. But that's when the turn started to happen, real slow, in the place nobody was looking. Under the leaves that seemed wilted, hidden low to the ground, the first melons began to form. And they grew firm, round, heavy in a way Grace had never seen in her life. She'd peel back a little corner of one melon just to test the smell, and the scent that rose off it was a strong honey sweetness, enough to make your mouth water. On one of those days, she cut a real small slice, in secret, and tasted it. Grace closed her eyes and nearly cried right there in the middle of the row. Never, in all her life, had she eaten a melon that sweet. Her mother's plan had worked. The trouble was, she had to prove it to the world, and a sweet melon is worth nothing if there's no one to buy it at a good price. And here came the second part of the plan Grace had kept in her chest and hadn't told a soul, not even her father, afraid of building up hope for nothing. For weeks she'd been secretly calling a buyer from the capital. He was a man who bought special fruit, the top quality kind, to sell to the fancy markets and even ship it far away. Grace had sent photos, had explained the method, and the man, suspicious at first, had agreed to come out to the farm on harvest day to taste the fruit with his own mouth before closing any deal. Everything hung on that day, and the day came. Grace, on purpose, set the harvest for a Saturday and spread the word that she was going to pick the famous salted melon. She wanted the whole town to see. She wanted Marcus to see. If she was going to win, let it be in front of everyone who'd laughed at her, called her crazy, and turned their backs on her family in the worst days. On Saturday morning, the farm's yard filled up. Neighbors who hadn't set foot there in years showed up. People from town came from far off just to watch the girl embarrass herself. They whispered, they laughed ahead of time, they bet each other that not one usable melon would come out of that cursed land. And of course, in the middle of the crowd, up rolled Marcus Prine's big, shiny car. Marcus got out of the car acting like he owned the world, dark glasses on, chewing a toothpick, two hired hands behind him. He came walking slow into the middle of the yard, spread his arms out to the crowd and announced good and loud, for everyone to hear. Got here right in time for the crop's funeral. Came to watch the doctor harvest the salt she planted herself. And the mean part of the ring laughed with him. Grace didn't answer. She just looked toward the road, and at that exact moment another car pulled in, a plainer one, driven by a gentleman in a dress shirt, the buyer from the capital who'd come to keep his word. Grace took a deep breath, looked at her father, who was trembling on the porch, looked at her mother's notebook that she held against her chest and said softly, "It's now, Mom." She gave the word, and along with two helpers she started to harvest. And then the whole yard went silent, because out of those leaves that everyone swore were dead, melon after melon started coming out, big, heavy, of a beautiful color, so pretty they didn't even look real. The cart filled up and kept filling. The crowd that had been laughing started glancing at each other, not understanding a thing anymore. And that's when we get back to that moment from the beginning. Marcus, seeing the plenty coming out of that ground, felt the floor slip out from under his feet. But he wasn't going to give in front of everybody. He marched over to the cart, grabbed the biggest melon of all, held it up high and yelled, "Look what the crazy girl did to her father's land. Must be salty as dried fish." And he sank his teeth into the fruit, hard, to prove to the crowd it was all ruined. He bit down with anger, chewed slow, and all of a sudden he went white as a sheet. The sweet juice ran down the corner of his mouth. He stopped chewing, his eyes went wide, and he stood there, unable to get a single word out in front of all those people waiting for him to speak. The buyer from the capital, curious, came close, took a slice Grace had cut, tasted it calmly, and the man's face opened into a huge smile. He said out loud, for everyone to hear, "Good Lord above, I've worked with fine fruit for 30 years, and I've never tasted a melon as sweet as this one. What sugar is this, miss? This here is export quality." The silence turned into a murmur, and the murmur turned into shock. Marcus, still holding the bitten melon in his hand, looked from side to side, his face red, searching for a way out, searching for something to say. But there was nothing to say. The sweetness of that fruit in his own mouth was the living proof that the girl he'd called crazy knew exactly what she was doing. The buyer wasted no time. He pulled out his checkbook right there, on the hood of the car, and made the offer in front of everybody. He offered for the whole harvest an amount so high that old Walter had to hold on to the porch wall to keep from falling. It was more money than the farm had brought in over the last 5 years put together. It was enough to pay off all the debt and have plenty left over. And the man went further, in front of the whole town. "And it's not just this harvest, miss. I want a contract. I want every melon this farm grows from now on, every year, with this same method. You've got in your hands something nobody in this whole area has. You've got gold planted in the ground." And he held out his hand to close the deal. Grace shook the buyer's hand firmly, and only then did she let the tears she'd been holding back for months run down her face. She turned to look for her father in the crowd. Old Walter was walking toward her, and the old man wasn't bent over anymore. He came with his head up, his eyes wet, and he hugged his daughter so tight in the middle of the yard that the two nearly fell over. He said in her ear, his voice breaking, "Forgive me, my girl. Forgive me for doubting you. Your mother was right. You were right. And me, a stubborn old man, I nearly threw it all away." Grace just held her father tighter and answered softly, "We did it, Dad. We kept the promise I made to Mom. The land is ours." And while father and daughter held each other, that same crowd that had come to laugh was now clapping. The women who whispered in the stores were now wiping the corners of their eyes. The children who yelled "crazy salt girl" in the street now looked at the young woman with respect. And Miss Cora, in the middle of them all, looked up at the sky and said to herself, "You see, Ellen. You see your daughter. She did it. And Marcus? Marcus." While all this was happening, he was left standing alone in the middle of the yard. One by one, his hired hands drifted away, kind of embarrassed. The neighbors who'd laughed along with him now turned their backs on him. He dropped the bitten melon on the ground, got into the big car in silence, and drove off without spinning his tires this time, the dust settling slow behind him. But life, that fair old lady, still had one account to settle with him. In the months that followed, the news of the miracle melon from old Walter's farm ran through the whole region. Buyers came from far off. The farm that was about to be sold for a handout became the most talked about and the most prosperous on that whole stretch of forgotten road. Grace's name earned respect. And Marcus's huge farm, the one that only lived off choking the little folks and buying land in other people's misery, started to shrink. With no more small crops to swallow up, and everybody now steering clear of doing business with that man of no word, his own projects ran aground. The people learned, from the salt girl, that they never had to sell themselves cheap to him again. A year later, at the time of the new harvest, old Walter was back on the porch drinking his coffee. Only now his eyes shone. He looked at the green, heavy rows, looked at his daughter walking among the melon plants with the same notebook of the late Ellen in her hand, and he smiled. The sadness that had lived in that face for 3 years had finally gone away for good. Grace, out in the middle of the crop, stopped, watched the sun coming up over the land she'd saved, and felt her mother right there beside her, so present she could almost touch her. She'd learned the biggest lesson of her life, that sometimes the whole world will call you crazy for believing in what only you and one other person can see. And that's all right. Let the world laugh. Because whoever has faith in what they know, whoever honors what they learned from the one they loved, and whoever has the courage to hold on tight when everyone points a finger, that person always, sooner or later, reaps what they sowed. And the harvest of the one who does things with love and with truth is always, always sweeter than anyone could ever imagine. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever been called crazy for believing in something only you could see, and then prove to everyone that you were right all along? Tell me down in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from while you're at it. I read every single one. And if this story touched your heart, go ahead and hit that like button. Then subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story.